This is Dr. Rodriguez, Psych 101, Chapter 3. We're Part D, and we're continuing talking about the brain. So in the midbrain is the reticular formation, and it is responsible for arousal and alertness. So when you think of the reticular formation, I want you to imagine a bunch of soldiers standing at formation. Right, so imagine them standing in formation, right? And when they're standing in formation like that, they need to be alert. They need to be, aroused. They need to be standing at attention. They need to be, paying attention. They cannot be dozing off, right? They can't. Yeah, this is a time for them to be alert and aroused when they are standing in formation. So anytime you see the reticular formation, think about soldiers standing in formation and how they need to be alert. Now, in the hindbrain or the brain stem, you have the medulla, the pons, and the cerebellum. And the ways to remember this is with medulla, imagine a metal. So medulla kind of looks like metal, medulla, metal. So think of a metal. Look at all these different metals that this guy has on. Now, these metals are they're laying on over his heart and his lungs. So that'll help you to remember how the medulla regulates our hearts and lungs. Medulla, all those metals. Where is the metal laying on top of? Oh, it's laying on top of this guy's heart and his lungs. Oh, the medulla regulates your hearts and lungs. The ponds. When you see the word ponds, I want you to think about a pond and relaxing next to the pond. You're reading a book and you fall asleep. All right. The ponds regulates relaxation and sleep. The cerebellum. When you look at the word cerebellum, focus on the bell part and think about this guy, how he has a bell balanced on his head. All right, cerebellum. Imagine the bell balancing on his head. So the cerebellum, it is responsible for balance and body movements, and this is the part that gets affected by alcohol, and so you start to feel tipsy. Right? When you've had too much alcohol, you no longer have your balance. You just feel tipsy. You feel like you're going to fall over. You're going to tip over. Cerebellum is balance. And that's medulla, the pons, and the cerebellum. Okay, so we talked about some of the biological mechanisms underlying behavior, responsible for behavior. We talked about genes. Right? We talked about the nervous system and the central, the parts of the nervous system. You have the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. Then you have your peripheral nervous system, right? And we broke each of those parts of the nervous system down. And now we're going to go to the third communication system, or the third behavioral mechanism that is responsible for behavior, and that's our endocrine system, okay? The endocrine system. An endocrine system is the hormones and the glands that release the hormones. So the endocrine system is hormones, these chemicals that get secreted into the bloodstream. And then the blood, goes through our body, and the hormones will affect the cells that have the receptors for that specific, hormone on it. So this might sound familiar, all right? With the nervous system, we have the neurotransmitters. Those are the chemicals that are in between neurons that tell the next neuron to get excited or not, all right? So the neurotransmitters are in the nervous system, and they get released in, in the brain, and it'll tell, or other parts of our body, but it's between neurons, and it'll tell the next neuron to get excited or not. The effects of neurotransmitters are localized. It's just in that area, okay? And the neurotransmitters act fast. They're fast acting. Whereas the endocrine system, the hormones in the endocrine system, their effects are more widespread, more throughout the body, and is slower to take effect, but it's longer lasting. So neurotransmitters are localized. They affect specific part of our body, and that happens pretty fast, but then it goes away, right, through reuptake. Endocrine system, hormones, that is more widespread. The effect is more widespread throughout our body. It takes a while to take effect, and it's longer lasting. Okay, so what are the glands in our body that release different hormones? The pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is the master gland. It tells all these other glands, to release their hormones. It is also responsible for growth. So the way that I remember is pituitary gland. I look at it and I'm like, pits. Okay, armpits, pits. Okay, our pits get smellier as we grow, right? Little ones' armpits don't smell, but then, over time, the pituitary gland says, all right, start adolescence, and then our pits start getting smelly. So pituitary gland, whenever I see pituitary, I look at it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's that master gland. Oh, pits. Oh, our pits get smellier as we grow. And it'll make you think of how it's the growth hormone, okay? The pineal gland. This one, I look at it and I see the word kneel here. Pineal, kneel. So I think about how my grandma would kneel next to her bed and pray before she would go to sleep, right? And so the pineal, I think of grandma kneeling, kneeling, saying her prayers before she went to sleep. So the pineal gland releases melatonin that helps us to get sleepy. Pineal, think of kneeling before sleep. Thyroid. Thyroid is responsible for metabolism, how fast we break down our food and our appetite. And so if you have hypothyroidism, your thyroid is not processing as quickly as it should. And the way that I remember thyroid is that our thighs are going to get big if it's not regulated. Our thyroid, so our thighs are going to get big if it's not regulated. The adrenal gland, it releases adrenaline, it's a stress response. So this is when we're scared, right? The pancreas releases insulin, helps to regulate blood sugar. If you have diabetes, your pancreas is not releasing the right amount of insulin. It's not breaking down the sugar in your body. So pancreas, if you don't just remember pancreas and, is how it's needed for insulin and regulating blood sugar, you can always pancreas, look at pan, think about pancakes and having it with maple syrup, and if you have a lot of maple syrup, you're gonna have too much sugar, right? So pancreas, you see the pancakes with maple syrup, woo, all sugary. All right, ovaries and testes. This is sexual motivation, reproduction. So the ovaries, you have estrogen, progesterone. Testes, you have androgen. Testosterone is one type, and so that's responsible for sexual motivation, reproduction. And these are the different glands. All right, so we talked about the different biological mechanisms responsible or that affect our behavior. We talked about genetics, right? DNA, chromosomes, recessive, dominant. We talked about the nervous system, right? The nervous system and the neurons throughout our body and our brain and our spinal cord, and how messages go through our neurons through like an electrical current, and then gets to that end, the axon terminal, and it releases a neurotransmitter, which is a chemical, and the chemical goes through the synaptic gap over to the next neuron and tells the next neuron to get excited or not. And then we have the endocrine system, which releases hormones and and tells our body, to grow or to release an egg, to be horny or to process sugar. So these are the different parts, the different biological mechanisms that a biological or biopsychologist would look to explain why people act the way that they do. So somebody who favors the field of biopsychology would look to biological reasons for people acting outside of the norm. Maybe like Phineas Gage and how he was acting weird. It was because his brain was damaged. So it's a biological reason for him acting weird. All right. So that is what I have for chapter 3. It's the biological mechanisms of behavior.